1.5 billion.
That is a massive number.
It's the number of consumers you, well, theoretically get access to. And then there's the money, a GDP estimated to hit 2.3 trillion Canadian dollars in 2026.
When you look at the raw data, the scale is just, it's staggering.
It really is. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are looking north. And I don't just mean for a ski trip to Whistler or, to grab some authentic maple syrup.
Not at all.
We're talking about the nitty-gritty of doing business in Canada. We're unpacking a really comprehensive guide from Dara Immigration Services, specifically their Business in Canada Blueprint for 2026.
And what's fascinating here, and what the source material really gets into, is that it challenges the typical American view of Canada. We tend to think of it as just the friendly neighbor.
Right, with the same strip malls and slightly different accents.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But from a business perspective, it is a completely different animal.
Right.
It's a powerhouse of stability with a corporate tax advantage that is actually quite aggressive compared to the United States.
That was the first thing that jumped out at me. We think of Canada as polite, maybe a bit sleepy, but the blueprint describes a very strategic, kind of sharp-elbowed economic environment.
It is.
But here's the nuance that really matters, and you and I talked about this. Canada isn't a monolith. It's not just one big block of ice and, polite people.
Not at all. It's a federation. And that word federation, it does a lot of heavy lifting here. It means you're dealing with these highly distinct regional economies.
So doing business in Toronto is just fundamentally different from doing business in Montreal or Calgary.
Completely. The regulations change, the tax structures change, and honestly, the cultural vibe changes entirely.
So our mission today is to take you on a tour of this federation. We're going to figure out where you should set up shop based on what you're selling, how to navigate the paperwork without losing your mind, and why, despite some very real hurdles, it still ranks as one of the best countries in the world for business.
Right, and if we zoom out a bit and look at the why, it really starts with the foundation. The reason Canada consistently ranks so highly isn't just about, having oil or timber. It's about the legal system.
The rules of the game. Because if I'm investing millions, I need to know the rules aren't going to change on me overnight. But isn't most of the Western world in a fairly similar legal footing? What makes Canada so distinct here?
It comes down to the flavor of the law. The Canadian system is built on English common law, with the big exception of Quebec, which uses a civil code system, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
But generally speaking, English common law provides a very, very predictable framework. It relies on precedent.
Which means if a court decided something 10 years ago, I can be reasonably sure they'll decide the same way today. It's not about a judge's whim.
It's not about a whim, it's about history. And for contracts and intellectual property, that predictability is gold. You aren't guessing. Then you layer on top of that the workforce. The source material highlights that over 60% of Canadian adults have post-secondary education.
And that's the highest in the OECD, right?
It is. So you're not just hiring bodies.
Yeah.
You're tapping into a pre-trained, highly educated labor pool. That lowers your training costs significantly.
You don't have to teach your staff how to learn.
They already know how.
And then we have to talk about the elephant in the room, the taxes. I think a lot of people operate under this assumption of, Canada, high taxes, socialist paradise, right? You just assume the government takes everything.
This is the biggest aha moment for investors. Personal income tax in Canada can be high, yes, but corporate tax, that's a completely different story. The general corporate income tax rate in Canada, the federal net rate is 15%.
15%? Wow, that seems incredibly low compared to the sticker shock people expect.
Well, and then you add the provincial rate. But even when you combine them, the total corporate tax burden is often significantly lower than what you'd find in many G7 competitors.
It's lower than many U.S. states, I'd imagine.
Oh, absolutely, when you factor in all the state taxes.
So it's essentially a tax haven disguised as a high-tax country.
In a way, yeah. It's designed to attract capital. And then you get the golden ticket on top of it all.
You mean CUSMA, the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement.
This is the successor to NAFTA. And this is why that 1.5 billion consumers number works. Explain the mechanics of this for me. How does a business actually leverage it?
It guarantees duty-free access to the USA and Mexico for most goods produced in Canada. So just think about the strategy here for a second.
Okay.
You set up your factory or your HQ in Canada. You pay the lower Canadian corporate tax rate. You pay your staff in Canadian dollars, which is usually a discount against the US dollar. But you sell your widgets to the American market without getting hammered by tariffs.
That is a powerful arbitrage play. You're operating in a stable, lower-cost environment with a backdoor key to the entire North American continent.
That is the core value proposition. You get the safety of Canada with the market size of the U.S. Okay, so let's say I'm sold on the Canada concept. I want in. Now comes the hard part. Where do I even put my desk? Because like we said, it's a huge country, and the source makes it really clear that this is a menu of economies. You can't just throw a dart at a map.
No, you really have to align your location with your industry vertical. If you put a fintech company in a logging town, you're going to have a bad time. You need to be where the ecosystem is.
Let's start with the heavyweight. Ontario. Specifically Toronto and that whole surrounding area. The source calls this the financial heart.
It is the engine. I mean, this is where the headquarters of Canada's big five banks are. It's the closest thing Canada has to New York City. And then just down the road, you have Waterloo, which is often called Silicon Valley North.
I've heard of Waterloo. That's where BlackBerry came from, isn't it?
Exactly. And because of the University of Waterloo, it just pumps out engineering talent at this massive rate. So if you're in financial services, advanced manufacturing, or, deep tech, this corridor is the center of gravity.
But gravity comes with a price tag. I'm assuming this isn't cheap.
It is a steep, steep price tag. The trade-off here is really clear. You get the deepest talent pool, you get the best access to venture capital, but you are paying for it. Commercial office rent is estimated around $55 per square foot or more.
Wow.
It's the most expensive place to do business in the country.
So you're paying a premium for serendipity. You're paying to bump into the right people at the coffee shop.
That's a great way to put it. You're buying access to the network. Now, let's fly west. Let's talk about British Columbia. Vancouver.
Vancouver. Always on the lists of most beautiful cities. But does pretty scenery translate to good business? Or is it just a nice place to retire?
It really depends on your business. Vancouver is the Pacific Gateway. The focus here shifts completely away from banking and manufacturing. You're looking at trade with Asia, green technology, and a massive film and TV production industry.
Hollywood North.
Precisely. But the economics are tricky. It is very high cost. Rents are right up there, around $52 per square foot, almost rivaling Toronto. But the challenge isn't just the office space cost, it's the scarcity of industrial land.
Because you're just sandwiched between the mountains and the ocean?
You can't just sprawl out.
Yeah.
There is literally nowhere to build. And because the cost of living is so astronomically high for residents, I mean, housing in Vancouver is legendary for its expense.
Oh, yeah.
Wage expectations are higher. You have to pay people enough to actually live there.
So, beautiful views, high overhead, high wages. That feels like a very specific play for specific industries. Like if you need to ship to Shanghai or shoot a movie, you go there. Otherwise, it might be too rich for a startup's blood.
I think that's fair.
Okay, now let's swing back east to the innovator, Quebec. Specifically Montreal.
Montreal's fascinating. If Toronto is New York, Montreal is, well, it's almost Berlin or Paris. It's a global leader in AI and aerospace. Companies like Bombardier and Airbus are huge there. It has this kind of European style mixed with North American efficiency.
But there is a catch. And the source material spends a lot of time on this. And frankly, it sounds a little intimidating for an outsider.
You cannot ignore the language factor.
Yeah.
I mean, you just can't. Quebec is a distinct society within Canada. To serve the local market and to operate legally, you must operate in French. This is all about Bill 96 compliance.
So my signage, my internal emails, my HR policies, everything.
It's a serious regulatory environment around language. You can't just wing it with Google Translate. You need to be functionally francophone as a business entity.
That sounds like a massive barrier to entry for an English-speaking company. Why would I even bother? Why not just go to Toronto and skip the French lessons?
Because the province knows it's a hurdle. So they bribe you.
They bribe you.
Effectively, yes. They offer these incredible incentives. Generous R&D tax credits that are some of the best in the world. And significantly lower rents. We're talking around $35 per square foot.
Okay, that's a big drop from Toronto's 55.
It is. Plus, very low electricity rates thanks to their hydroelectric dams. So if you're a tech company that's burning a massive amount of power, say, for server farms or AI training models, and you're willing to hire a local manager to navigate the language landscape, it's a steal.
Okay, so if I'm power hungry and R&D focused, I learn French. Got it. Now, for my personal favorite surprise in the research, the low-tax maverick, Alberta.
Alberta's interesting. Traditionally, it's the Texas of Canada, the energy capital, oil and gas. But they're seeing the writing on the wall regarding fossil fuels, so they are rapidly diversifying into ag tech and logistics.
But here is where it gets really interesting for your wallet. I read this twice to make sure it was real. No provincial sales tax.
That is huge. Most provinces charge a sales tax on top of the federal tax. Alberta doesn't. No PST. And on top of that, the provincial corporate tax rate is just 8%. It is the lowest combined corporate tax rate in the country.
So if you are purely optimizing for the bottom line, Alberta just sounds like the winner.
From a tax perspective, absolutely. And the rent. It's currently what they call a tenant's market, especially in Calgary. You are looking at around $28 per square foot.
Why is it so cheap?
Well, because the oil industry took a pretty big hit a few years back, and it left a lot of these shiny glass towers empty. So high vacancy rates mean you have negotiating power. You can get Class A office space for a fraction of the cost of Toronto.
So low taxes, cheap rent, but you have to be okay with an economy that, rides the roller coaster of oil prices.
That's the trade-off.
Finally, let's look at the up-and-comer. Atlantic Canada, Halifax.
Yeah, this is the ocean tech supercluster. So shipbuilding, sustainable fisheries, food processing, it's a much smaller market compared to Toronto or Montreal, but the operating costs are the absolute floor. Rents are around $22 per square foot.
And they are hungry for people, right? I read about the Atlantic immigration program.
That's a key differentiator. The Atlantic provinces are facing demographic challenges and aging population, so the government has made it significantly easier to hire foreign talent there. If recruitment is your biggest bottleneck, and you just can't find people in Toronto, Halifax might be your solution because the visa pathway is so much more streamlined.
Okay, so we have picked our spot. Let's say we're going to Calgary for those sweet, sweet tax breaks. Now we need to talk nuts and bolts. How do we actually start this thing? I assume I can't just start selling lemonade on the corner.
Not quite. Step one is structure. You have three main choices: sole proprietorship, partnership, or a corporation.
Sole proprietorship sounds easiest, just me and my laptop.
It's the simplest to set up, for sure, but it comes with unlimited liability.
Yeah.
Meaning, if the business gets sued, you get sued. Your house, your car, your personal savings, they're all on the table.
Okay, scratch that. Too risky for any kind of international business.
Exactly. Most serious entrepreneurs looking to enter the market are going to look at a corporation. It creates a separate legal entity. The corporation can get sued, it can go bankrupt or get taxed, and your personal assets remain largely protected.
And before you print business cards, you have to play the naming game. The NUAS report.
NUANS.
Oh.
It stands for New Upgraded Automated Name Search. You have to perform a search to ensure your name is unique and doesn't infringe on trademarks. You can't just call yourself Maple Tech if Maple Tech already exists. The government will flat out reject you.
It's a formalized clearance process.
It is.
Now, this next part was a bit technical, but it seems crucial. The difference between federal and provincial incorporation. This feels like a strategic fork in the road where if you turn left, you're fine, but if you turn right, you might hit a wall later.
It's a massive strategic decision. If you incorporate federally, you get the right to use your business name across all of Canada. It's great for branding if you want to be a national brand.
You want federal.
But there's a big catch. Federal corporations require 25% of the directors to be resident Canadians.
Oh, wow. So if I'm a foreign entrepreneur, say from the US or Europe, and I want to be the sole director, I can't do federal.
Not unless you hire a Canadian to sit on your board.
Yeah.
And that person carries liability, so it's not just a paper position.
That's a deal breaker for a lot of people who want total control.
It is. However, if you incorporate provincially, it's generally cheaper and simpler, but your name is only protected in that specific province. But here's the loophole the source highlights.
Okay.
Provinces like British Columbia and Ontario have waived the residency requirement.
So in BC or Ontario, a foreign entrepreneur can be the sole director of a provincial corporation.
Exactly. You don't need a Canadian partner.
Huh.
And that is a very, very popular route for foreign investors. You incorporate on Ontario, you get your control, and then you worry about the other provinces later.
Got it. That's a massive tip for anyone listening who doesn't have a Canadian best friend yet, and then eventually the tax man comes calling.
Yes. You'll need a business number from the CRA, that's the Canada Revenue Agency. And there's a specific threshold you really need to watch, $30,000.
That's the magic number.
If your revenue hits $30,000 in a single quarter, you must register for GST or HST, that's the sales tax. You have to collect it from your customers and remit it to the government. Before that 30K mark, you're technically a small supplier and don't have to collect it.
But you can.
Many choose to do so voluntarily to get tax credits on their own business expenses.
Okay, so that's the how-to. But let's be real, it's not all sunshine and maple syrup. The guide highlights some pretty big hurdles, and the first one is just getting money.
Access to capital is
Yeah.
a major friction point. The source explicitly warns that Canadian banks are historically risk-averse compared to U.S. banks.
So you can't just walk in with a smile, a pitch deck, and a dream.
Not likely. In the U.S., the banking culture often looks at potential. They bet on the jockey. In Canada, they look at collateral. Securing a business loan without significant assets to back it up or a Canadian credit history is very, very difficult. They want to know, if you fail, what can we sell to get our money back?
So if I'm a tech startup with nothing but code, I'm out of luck with the big banks.
You have to look at alternatives. The Business Development Bank of Canada, or BDC, they specialize in this. They're a crown corporation, so owned by the government, mandated to support small businesses. They'll take on risk that commercial banks won't touch.
Okay, so there are options.
There are. Or you look at government grants. The SR&ED program, Scientific Research and Experimental Development, is huge. If you're doing R&D, the government will essentially pay for a chunk of it.
So don't rely on a commercial loan. Rely on the ecosystem supports.
Correct. Be creative because the big banks are conservative.
The other hurdle mentioned was something I found genuinely surprising, the interprovincial barrier. We started by calling Canada a federation, but this sounds almost like the EU, or maybe even worse in some ways.
It really does raise an important question about that federation concept. I mean, surprisingly, it can sometimes be easier to trade with the U.S. than between Canadian provinces.
Wait, really? It's easier to send goods to New York than from Toronto to Montreal.
In some cases, yes, because the regulations and the certifications differ by province. A trucking license in Ontario might not work in Quebec. A food safety standard in Alberta might be different from Nova Scotia.
Different labeling laws, different safety standards.
Exactly. There are famous cases of alcohol being illegal to transport across provincial lines.
That feels incredibly counterintuitive for a single country. You'd think the free trade agreement would apply inside the country, too.
It is counterintuitive, and it's a long-standing political issue. They call them internal trade barriers. The strategy for a new business is, don't assume national compliance. Just because you're legal in Toronto doesn't mean you can just ship to Vancouver tomorrow.
Focus on your local market first.
Or the international market. Just don't assume the national one is easy.
Okay, let's talk about the people part. Specifically, you, the listener, you want to move to Canada to run this business. There is a huge misconception here that we absolutely need to clear up.
This is critical. I can't stress this enough. Owning a business in Canada does not give you the right to work there.
Say that again for the people in the back, because I think people just assume it's my company, surely I can go work at it.
You can own 100% of a Canadian corporation as a non-resident. You can sit on a beach in Florida, own the shares, receive dividends, that's all fine. But if you want to enter Canada and actively manage it, pick up the phone, sign checks, manage staff, meet clients, you need a work permit.
Ownership does not equal residency.
Correct. You need a visa. And there are specific pathways. The Intra-Company Transfer is common if you have an existing company elsewhere and want to move key staff. There's the C11 Entrepreneur Stream for self-employed owners.
And then there's the startup visa. It sounds flashy. Is it as good as it sounds?
It's designed for innovative ideas that can compete globally. But here's the catch. You can't just apply on your own. You must secure support from a designated organization, a venture capital fund, an angel investor group, or a business incubator.
They have to vouch for you.
Exactly. They have to issue a letter of support. The government is effectively outsourcing the due diligence. They're saying, if this angel investor group thinks you're legit, then we'll give you a visa.
So it connects right back to that risk aversion we talked about with the banks. The government wants proof the business has potential before they grant the visa.
Precisely. They don't want to bet on a ghost.
So let's bring this all home. What does this all mean for someone looking at Canada in 2026?
It means opportunity, but opportunity that requires navigation. Canada offers incredible stability, a massive trade network through CUSMA, and a tax regime that is surprisingly friendly to corporations. But it is not a plug-and-play market.
You have to pick your region carefully. Are you paying for the Toronto network or the Calgary tax break? You have to really map that out.
And you have to structure it right from day one. A mistake in your corporate structure, like not having the right directorships, can actually hurt your immigration chances later on. The source mentions specifically that pathways like owner-operator rely on getting that structure correct for the beginning.
You need to map the legal, tax, and immigration strategies all together.
They all have to talk to each other.
It's a chess game. But if you win, the prize is pretty big.
It is. You get a solid legal foundation, lower costs, and access to 1.5 billion consumers.
I want to leave everyone with a final thought to mull over. We talked about how hard it is to trade between provinces. In a globalized world, why is it sometimes harder to move a truckload of goods from Toronto to Montreal than from Toronto to New York? It really makes you think about where the true borders lie in business. Are they lines on a map, or are they lines in a regulation book?
It certainly challenges our assumptions about what a national economy actually is.
A huge thank you to the team at Dara Immigration Services for the source material on this one. It was a real eye-opener.
It's a pleasure to walk through it.
And thank you for listening. Go build something big. We'll see you on the next deep dive.